Richard Branson was not the kid you'd bet on to become a billionaire. Sure, he was born into wealth, but even then his family wasn't exactly rich, they were lower middle class. And throughout his academic career, Branson was anything but stellar. In fact, he was quite possibly the worst student in his entire school, and he didn't even finish high school. He dropped out at 16. So who was this dropout that would go on to build a $3.5 billion empire? What made him take the leap of faith that day in 1970 that changed everything? This is the story of Richard Branson and how he went from high school dropout to building an empire with a little help from his friends. At 16, Branson had already been kicked out of 2 boarding schools. He attended Clifton House School in Sussex, where his report card reads, "Richard does not apply himself. His mind seems to be elsewhere. Richard has contrived to fail in the few subjects he offers." He was then sent to Stowe, a prestigious boarding school that counts Prince William and HRH Duke of Cambridge among its alumni. There, Branson was labeled lazy and was once more told that his mind seemed to be elsewhere. All the while, Branson felt like a failure. His grades suffered, and he soon became the worst student in his year. But Branson had a knack for spotting opportunities while everyone else was distracted. When he was just 12 years old, he noticed that his mother was paying far too much for her phone line. She was being charged for long-distance calls that she never made. After complaining to the company, they refused to budge. So young Branson took matters into his own hands. He used his allowance to place ads in local newspapers, offering to pay for people as phone bills if they let him use their phones. It wasn't long before Branson had enough numbers to convince the company to renegotiate his mother's bill. That was the first time Branson experienced the power of leveraging numbers, and it wouldn't be the last. When Branson was 15, he spotted another opportunity to make money. He had noticed that students at his school were having trouble getting to London for the weekend. The train station was miles away and hitchhiking was illegal. So Branson did what any sensible teenager would do. He bought a Volkswagen bus and painted it with the slogan "Cool Bus" and charged fellow students £1 to drive them into town. Business was good, but Branson wanted more. He approached his mother and asked to borrow £180, the equivalent of about $2,400 today. With that, he bought another bus and started running weekend trips. Within months, he had 6 buses ferrying students to and fro. He named the company Student and printed a magazine by the same name. Branson was now officially a publisher. But there was a problem. Branson's father lent him £100, the modern-day equivalent of about $1,300 to start the business. And now that he had made some money, he felt compelled to repay him. Unfortunately, Branson's idea of bookkeeping was haphazard at best. He couldn't account for all his expenses or revenue, and when his dad asked for the £100 back, Branson simply didn't have it. His dad, who was a wealthy lawyer, was disappointed. He called Branson into his office and said, "You will never succeed in business. I'm giving you one last chance. If you can turn this magazine around and make it a success, I'll forget about the loan. But if not, you'll have to find another way of making money." Branson was scared. Not only did he want to repay his father, but he also wanted his respect. So he put his head down and worked hard on the magazine. In those days, magazines made most of their money from classified ads, so Branson decided to bulk up the classified section. He reached out to companies and offered to place their ads in the magazine for free, if they would agree to take out a larger ad in the following edition. For some companies, this was a no-brainer. They agreed to take out the free ad, and in return, Branson gave them a full-page ad in the next edition. Before long, the classified section was thicker than ever, and Branson was raking in the dough. He paid back his father and still had money left over. But Branson knew that this kind of bookkeeping was unsustainable. He needed to increase sales of the magazine itself. He had an epiphany while walking past a tobacconist. He realized that students were going to the shops to buy magazines because they could afford them, not because they wanted to read the articles. So Branson reworked the magazine, adding funny cartoons, comic strips and puzzles. Then he hired freelance writers to pen short stories. One of those writers was a young man named Nick Powell. Branson and Powell became fast friends. And when Branson decided to launch a new spin-off magazine aimed at record collectors, Powell was right there alongside him. The pair set up shop in a small room in Branson's house, which doubled as a bedroom, kitchen, and office. And it was here that Branson got the idea to start a record label. He had noticed that while music was featured heavily in the magazine, there was nowhere for young bands to showcase their music. So Branson and Powell launched a new company, which they named EMI after the initials of its founders. Then they released their first single, a novelty song called "Do You Know the Muffin Man?" by a band called Taste the Floor. Sales were okay, but Branson knew that the company needed a hit if it was going to survive. One day, Branson heard a demo tape by a band called Hot Chocolate. Their lead singer was a charismatic performer named Errol Brown. Branson loved the demo, so he signed the band on the spot. Then he did something crazy. He quit publishing magazines entirely and placed all his chips on the record label. Suddenly, Branson and Powell found themselves in competition with industry titans like Apple, CBS, and Decca. Their shot at success hung in the balance. And then came the call that changed everything. It was from John Kay, manager of the British rock band Led Zeppelin. He told Branson that he was looking for a new distributor for his band's latest album. Could Branson be interested? Of course, Branson was interested. He spent hours agonizing over his pitch, crafting the perfect proposal that he hoped would secure him the contract. Finally, he was ready. He sat down at his desk and picked up the phone. But before he could say a word, Hendrix cut him off. "I don't want to hear any sob stories about how you're trying to make it big, or how your mum and dad were killed in a freak coconut accident," he said. "All I want to know is whether you can distribute our records or not." Branson apologized profusely and explained that he hadn't meant to offend him. "Good," Hendrix replied, "because I haven't got all day." And with that, he laid out his vision for distributing the records. Hendrix liked what he heard and handed Branson the distribution rights. But there was one condition. If the records didn't sell, Hendrix wanted the rights back immediately. Branson agreed and waited anxiously for the results. It wasn't long before Hendrix was on the phone again. "You've sold out," he said, "and we want to sign with you." Branson couldn't believe his ears. He had beaten the industry giants, but that was nothing compared to what happened next. Hot Chocolate's Single You Sexy Thing topped the charts and went double platinum. Branson's fledgling record label was suddenly hot property. Labels like CBS and Decca tried to buy him out. But Branson wasn't interested in selling. Instead, he leveraged his success to broker a deal with CBS whereby they would each own 50% of the record label. Branson had secured his future. Branson's journey from high school dropout to record executive was nothing short of miraculous. But his story proves that if you have the guts to take a risk, the sky really is the limit. So what are you waiting for? Go out there and make your dreams come true. Now, speaking of taking risks, have you heard the story of Larry Ellison? He dropped out of college and almost lost everything during the dot-com bubble. Yet today he owns a $400 million mansion and is one of the richest men in the world.